continue to cover all the angles here. European diplomats in the country and looming talks of a ceasefire potentially now. We're joined in the studio by Dr. Sarah FEUER, a research fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies here in Tel Aviv. Thanks for joining us here with all this talk of a ceasefire. And there's been some varying perspectives on this, whether you're getting the reports from Hamas or from this side here. What might a type of ceasefire now look like this time?
Well, if we are really headed for a ceasefire, and I think it's still a big if, I mean, there is additional pressure now seeming to come from the United States, from the Biden administration. I think at the moment, the discussions that are underway about a ceasefire are partly there's an effort to try and decouple whatever ceasefire will be at place from the terms of an arrangement between Israel and Hamas moving forward. Because both sides, of course, have their own demands, and to the extent that there's really no possibility of meeting in the middle, so to speak, the thinking is that you don't want to link the ceasefire to both sides meeting the other's demands. And so,
certainly in light of 2014, when that war brought to an end with an agreed upon a set of parameters, an actual agreement signed, things that didn't come to fruition, and in the end, though, this time we're not likely to see some sort of, as you're saying, some sort of paper with agreements and signed to.
I think in part because there is the awareness that in 2014, I think it was only maybe 2 of the items on the list in those parameters ended up being fulfilled, and so we'll have to see. I think there's another sort of interesting dynamic to watch as we enter perhaps what is a new stage of sort of inching toward a ceasefire or discussions of negotiations towards some sort of arrangement, and that is the involvement of regional actors in this. I mean, if we see, for example, Egypt playing a dominant role, I think that will likely be in Israel's interest, as opposed to other players in the region, such as Qatar, who have obviously been supporting Hamas and who are themselves on different sides of a broader regional struggle here.
Does Qatar have more sway, perhaps, than Egypt at this point?
Well,
the fact that they're already there?
It's tricky, exactly. It's tricky because, of course, Qatar has very close ties to Hamas, and so it would be reasonable to assume that if you're going to try and look for an actor that can exert pressure on Hamas, you want to go to where their closest friends are.
Where the money's coming from.
Where the money's coming from. On the other hand, Qatar has also broader regional interests that I think do not align with Israel's, and so Israel sees, I think, more of a desire to bring the Egyptians in. How much sway the Egyptians will have on Hamas is an open question. Thus far, they haven't had much, so it's going to be a delicate game, I suppose, and it's one dynamic that we'll need to watch.
Who else in the region? I mean, we've heard Erdogan and Turkey being very loud on this conflict again, maybe seeing the opportunity to again add to his relevance or Turkey's relevance in this conflict. Iran's been a little quieter, but certainly we know they're behind the scenes and an active player in this arena here.
Right.
But what about the United Arab Emirates? Who else is chiming in a relevant way right now?
So everybody's chiming in. The question of sort of the level, how loudly they're chiming in is an interesting one. I mean, the camp of sort of pragmatic Arab states, including those with which Israel signed normalization agreements last year, it's interesting. They chimed in very early on to condemn Israel for what had been happening in Jerusalem, but they've been quite even-handed and restrained when it has come to the operation in Gaza, because, of course, they don't have any interest in seeing Hamas emboldened out of this.
Does that go for the Saudis as well?
It does go for the Saudis. The Saudis are also apparently trying to play a role in brokering some sort of cessation of hostilities. It's an open question, again, how influential they will be. On the Iran side, they're certainly egging this on. It's, of course, they're enjoying the predicament that Israel finds itself in. But in a way, I think the significance of the Iranian axis in all of this is actually the demonstration effect that I think Israel wants to try and make for Hezbollah and others who are watching this operation in Gaza and who may have thoughts of their own about escalating the situation.
I think you hit on one of the key points of this round, which is the perception of what's taking place versus maybe the actual battlefield gains or what's actually happened on the ground, how much more important or what is more important at this point? We're left to wonder, I think. Is it the perception of what took place or the actual gains in the battlefield? Looking at the smoking skyline of Gaza City, is that good for Israel, or does it actually work against Israel?
It's very difficult to know, I think, this early on. Certainly, Hamas is already painting this as something of a victory, and really the bar for Hamas to demonstrate that is quite low. Of course, all they need to show are images of Israelis cowering in their shelters and that, or things being stirred up in Jerusalem. This is a big symbolic value. For Israel, I think the bar is higher, for better or worse, and this is why you've seen the IDF try to demonstrate the number of targets that they've hit, but I don't think it's going to be as immediate an image of victory for Israelis as they might be hoping for. On the other hand, we saw in 2006, after the second Lebanon war between Israel and Hezbollah, in the immediate aftermath of that, I think a lot of Israelis felt that there was not much of a victory they could point to, and yet here we are 15 years later, and the deterrence held. So these things often take time for the perception to catch up to the reality.
Many eyes, especially after yesterday's rocket fire from Lebanon, on that very arena is a major concern for the country. Dr. Sarah FEUER, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Interesting moment we're in, and we are also joined right now by Robert Cohen, managing partner of Benson Oak Ventures. Thanks for being with us.